And that is for the sake of what I'm here to do and for the sake of your time, because the information is out there. Basically, anything you want to hear and research these days, you could find it, right? But really, what it's more about maybe is matching frequency. So I'm here to just be honest about where I'm at with my frequency and discuss what it is I feel like I'm here to discuss. And that really, it does revolve around the topic of music, frequency, and that's how we had originally got into the dimensions discussion, right? Because it was the idea of spiritual warfare. How music permeates everything, but how we can really be talking about different realities for different people. So, jumping into that, what I had heard was that, for example, last week we had talked about third, fourth, and fifth dimension. This is just a visualization concept, okay? But the idea is that in mathematics, we do know there's other dimensions. There's more than just the three dimensions, the length, width, and height, right? Now, what the fourth and the fifth, that's where we get into more like Einstein says one thing, New Age says another. What we had focused on last week was the idea that third is the physical, the material, maybe more what we would actually call the matrix. Fourth is a weird sort of in-between zone that New Agers will say, well, we didn't talk about this last week, but this is like where you would go when you astral voyage. This is where you go maybe when you're in an alpha mindset. No, it's theta mindset, like a certain wavelength in your own mind. This is where you go when you dream at night. And some people would even say this is where you go when you die. Okay, all of these are just theories, but it's a place that resembles the third dimension very much, but it is at a higher vibration. So things happen differently there. Like, for example, you could fly or you could think and be somewhere. Now, what New Age is not in agreement on is like that this is an all airy-fairy place, and that, really New Age might even try to argue that fear is the only real problem and it's only in your mind, that there is no like existential evil issue, right? But what we talked about last week was if there were beings that, let's say, were evil, okay, they were in this good bad dichotomy, their wavelength or their frequency wasn't high enough or fine enough to go all the way to a pure state of love, but they were still in a place of service to self. It was like a selfishness. It was, let me back up for a second and just say that there's charts out there, and I'll probably share one, that show that different emotions have different wavelengths or frequencies, and that the denser ones, fear is the densest, right? But you have like anger and shame, and these are all really low, and selfishness, and all these things are lower. They're just going to vibrate at a lower frequency, whereas selflessness, love, peace, joy, kindness, selflessness, these things vibrate naturally to higher frequencies. So the higher frequency would maybe be fifth dimension and up, and from there on, these sort of negative beings can't get there, right? They just can't get there. It just wouldn't work from this universal model. They would be locked out. And they couldn't fake it either, right? And these might be the type of beings that like to fake a lot of things. They want the shortcuts. They, for whatever reason, have a fallen nature and a lower nature, and they're vibrating lower. But they could be in the fourth dimension. And if they were in the fourth dimension, they would be able to have an advantage over the third, right? They would be like, if the fourth is time, as Einstein said, then they would be able to sort of zip around in time. They wouldn't be slaves to time, right? And they would maybe be not in the electromagnetic spectrum of the three dimensions. So they might be invisible or just out of the visual spectrum that people stuck in the 3D or humans stuck in the 3D. They couldn't see it, right? So that would be the 3D. It's almost like an invisible fence that would be occupying the same space as the fourth and the fifth dimension. But because of where you're vibrating, you're going to experience or see things from a certain perspective. So if you were a more evolved, maybe the highest evolved of this sort of negative entity, you would be in the fourth dimension, right? That's probably where you would live. And then you would mess with the three-dimensional people. You would have dominion over them. You would be able to basically be like gods to them, but like little g gods to them, right? So that's my proposition of like, if we're getting into David Icke's reptilians, or we're getting into demons, or we're getting into like gray aliens or whatever, if there are entities messing with us and enslaving us and being able to do things that just completely bamboozle us, like mind control us, hypnotize us, make us forget things, make us miss time. They might be operating from that place, but the fourth dimension is still somewhat like the third. Like there might actually still be technology. There might actually still be physical things. So that's my idea of the fourth dimension. And I wanted to flesh that out a little bit more because, that's why I think astral voyaging, from my own perspective, can be very dangerous, because if you start rolling around in the fourth dimension without understanding that from a naive perspective, like I talked about last week, that anything outside, once you get outside of this 3D fence, especially 20 years ago when it was much harder to get out of it, you think it's all God. You think it's all supernatural. Anything supernatural is good or benevolent, but that's not necessarily the case. It might be a little bit more complicated than that. And once you're in that astral, or even in your dream state, you might be now more easily influenced by these entities if you yourself haven't worked on your own inner vibration, right? If you haven't healed your traumas, if you haven't learned to overcome your fear. And that's exactly what I did in my 20s. I didn't even know the depth of some of my traumas and my wounds and my fears, because I was operating in a more delusional space, like just a surface personality. And I started delving into astral voyaging and all these things without any protection at all. And it really did invite some very nasty, terrible things into my life that this and no more. I'm going to stop there with that today before I get into that. But maybe another time we can talk about that. But that is a path of deliverance. But this is what spiritual warfare is about, that these beings, that most people in the 3D are like, oh, what are you talking about? Everything's great, no problems, just da-da-da. But the people who have started to tap into the fourth dimension, they're recognizing that there's something more going on, and they see more of this influence or this being messed with. They see more of an evil force happening. But the people that are entirely in the third dimension, even if they're being affected by those beings, they're not aware, and they don't want to be aware, because there's a certain level of manipulation that's happening. This is all just, a thought experiment, like a theory to try to explain somewhat what's going on. But I think when people say that they're woke or they're awake, but they're not really acknowledging anything that I'm talking about, they're seeing woke, they're translating woke as a counterfeit woke. It's more of a woke about, social justice or very 3D topics. They're not completely woke, but that's the point I wanted to get into with the solar flares. I actually heard this point from Carrie Kay online. And once again, I'm not endorsing and I'm not condemning her. I go where spirit leads me to listen to different concepts. And it doesn't mean that I'm down with any of the other things that person is saying. But she, I thought, explained this concept very well. And I resonated with the idea that there's a counterfeit happening, that the true creator, when you get fifth dimension and on, that's the real truth. That's truth, that's spirit, that's the creator. We're all one there, which is why service to others makes sense there, because you understand the connection. Why would you hurt somebody else? Why would you forsake somebody else just so you have pleasure? It doesn't even make sense from a certain vantage point, right? A certain evolutionary place of unity. And that is the creator. But these fallen beings, whatever is happening to them, they don't have creativity. They're not connected to source, but they can just copy. And that's the counterfeit. And some people would say that's what the Matrix is. It's a counterfeit, right? It's a counterfeit world. And so that's where concepts get so confusing. Like you might have truly people waking up to the fact that maybe we are in a spiritual battle and we need to actually be awake to it, because that's the only way to actually do something about it, is to be aware of it. And Instead, woke turns into a completely different concept. So you can't even really talk about it anymore, because now being woke means basically somehow it's really just become like political divide, right? I don't even want to get into what woke is even being defined these days. I mean, it's almost different for a million people. But in many instances, it's still very materialistic. It's very 3D, has nothing to do with dimensions or supernatural beyond it. That all is still silly to those people, but they're woke somehow. So that's not what woke meant 20 years ago, but it got co-opted. Another concept, she didn't bring that one up, I'm bringing that one in, but she was bringing up the idea that it's like sort of where people are vibrating. So, maybe that's not even, maybe it's not the fault of those people. They're just, their vibration is still very 3D. And then the woke concept gets translated in a 3D way. And so she was saying like 5D, like we're about to have a lot of people, or a good number of people, start to experience 5D. And this is something that happens on the inside of you. And once it's on the inside of you, it can't be taken away because it's a vibration. And so you could still be here in the 3D world, but you're operating at a 5D level. And when you're there, you're outside of the spiritual warfare. You're above the battlefield at that point. You might still be very much there, but it's not affecting you because of the vibration of it. The entities no longer have control over you. You actually have control over them. You have authority and dominion over them when you come from Christ. This is the idea of Christ consciousness. And so 5D would be people ascending to that place. Whereas then at the exact same time, we get 5G, which is this sort of ethereal, counterfeit, negative, or I would say negative version, although in many ways it's supposed to be bringing about a whole new reality, of smart things in a virtual world, etc. But that's just one of the ways in which things get co-opted and counterfeit. And so that's where the solar flares come in. That there really was a solar flare activity, and many people in the New Age community would say that that's all about like it's a spiritual thing. It's a good thing that we're being blasted with this. It's all about the earth going through some changes and ascending. That's the way they would translate it. And that you can use these vibrations, this light energy coming from the sun, these solar flares, this magnetic activity. You can use all of this to upgrade your body, first and foremost by allowing things to come to the surface, which is definitely what was happening for me last week. Transmute it, heal it. It's all part of this sort of evolution that we're going through, an evolution that like the Mayans and all these people said, right? The age of Aquarius. It's all part of that. But then, and this is what makes me sad, then it would be translated though as like a negative agenda by these dark fallen ones through their stringed instrument weather modification. And it was all some kind of experiment on us, and it was all fake. And then you have people fighting over this, right? And that's the distraction, because, many people make the case that we are living in a time period where liberation is happening, that there are people who are finally getting free of this prison that we've been in, this frequency prison. They're ascending, they're returning to Christ consciousness, they're getting in tune with their source and their creator, which makes them these infinite beings. And so the only thing that the fallen ones can do, who have had this control from the fourth dimension and don't want to lose it, but would lose it if we all ascended to 5D, the only thing that they can do is to distract us and do this counterfeit stuff. And just because it's the end of it, it's their end. Once we're beyond them, that's it. That's their end. That you can get biblical about it. You can do like the Paul Levi-Whiteco idea that it's a mind virus, and all we need to do is heal from it, and then it's just obsolete. It's the idea that it's the ego, selfishness, and that once you master that and you get past it, it basically gets obliterated because you return to your light body or your soul, or like pre-fall, like Jesus has already saved us, and it's just about us accepting that, and that these negative ones are basically going around frantically freaking out because they know their day is over, and all they can do is really distract us. And it's really sad that the truth or community has become part of that, but I guess in truth everything can be, right? This is where discernment comes in. Maybe that's my legalist view for years. It was like, oh, conspiracy theorists good, normies bad. I didn't call them normies because that's new, but these people that are continuing the matrix by not waking up, if they'll just wake up. But once again, that's in that, look at my vibration when I'm thinking that. It's us versus them, which is that dichotomy. And we're looking for the third way. We're looking for a much more intelligent way of viewing the world than black and white, because the black and white has been part of our prison to see everything as this and that. Yeah. So the only other thing that I wanted to say about that is that the fourth dimension, if you're somebody who remembers your dreams, which I've been somebody who kind of remembers her dreams, I used to take it a lot more seriously. I mean, really seriously. And I always was mad at myself that I wouldn't journal more, because it was true. When I journaled, I would actually remember my dreams a lot better. And I remember being jealous of David Wilcox, because way back in like 2015, 16, I listened to a lot of him. And he would dream journal and he knew all this stuff about it. And it was like, oh my gosh, if I really want to know the fourth dimension, like to me, the answers were in the fourth dimension. But I've since begun to realize that I think the fourth dimension can just be a big distraction. And I think Magenta Pixie talked about this idea that people could just find rooms there and live out eons thinking that they're in the truth, but it's still just more of a distraction. There's further to go where you sort of really get out of the illusion. So I don't know if that's the case, but I will say one thing about my dreams that's always been true is that I know the architecture. It's really hard to explain. I know the places and the architecture very, very intimately, almost like I know it all at once. And I can't explain it. And it's part of the reason why I have a hard time remembering my dreams, because it's such a different way of thinking. But I'm not an architect. I don't even really draw architecture. I've never been interested in that. But when I dream, I intimately know like the layout of places, and that's what I remember. I remember when I visited these places more than once. I remember these landscapes. I remember places, and it's not like an overview. It's not like I'm flying over them. It's like I know it all at once. So I wanted to mention that because I talked a little bit about Picasso and the Cubism movement, trying to, that's the thing about the fourth dimension, is the idea that you know all angles at once. And it's also creepy when you think that there might be beings in the fourth dimension that can kind of see that way as well, like see inside of us. I don't think that's true. I don't think they can see our thoughts. But I do think that whatever's happening from the fourth dimension is a leg up on the third. I'll say that. So I think that's most of the notes that I wanted to talk about for that. How did I do on time-wise? Yeah, well, I talked more. Time flies whenever I talk about these subjects in particular. But